I love shapeshifters. I want to make a shifter world homebrew centered around a war with shapeshifters. One idea that I had to deal with perverted players disrupting the campaign was breast mimics. Let the player grope a busty tavern wench, have the mimics lick his fingers, and watch their faces turn to horror as you ask them to roll for agility. Maybe they keep their hand if they have a good roll, but I suspect they won't disrupt anymore. I'm not sure if the tavern wench is going to be a mind-controlled slave, a mad mimic tamer, or maybe start as one and become the other. I do think they should reside in women's bathhouses. Maybe they prey on young girls going into puberty. Maybe they're smart enough to make deals with less endowed women. Maybe they just attach to girls who fall asleep in the bath and make them forget any differences. They do need to have some basic influence over their hosts. It might start has mild mind control. Then maybe, through some addictive chemicals mixed with magic, they become dependent on them, slowly going insane, or maybe just developing a particularly flirty, yet manipulative personality. I think variety is key here, and want the mimics to have multiple options. If you're doing an NSFW campaign, you can make them have the ability to convert genders. But I think that's counterproductive to the goal of making my players scared of girls. You know, in addition to actual chests, doors, tables, books, rocks, and well, everything. Jesus Christ, why'd I turn to Heisenberg towards the end of it? Let's see you try to grab those Mama Milkies now, Ethan Winters. My name is Jacob Crowe, and welcome to the Crow's Perch. Today we'll be covering two different stories, the first of which is titled The Briar, the Finch, and the Neckbeard. So without further ado, let's gather up a murder and get right into this story. Okay, the Neckbeard story. Well, so this was a game of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So, I was in a local game store, and we all decided to do a villain campaign. But, well, evil is sexy and fun. But we don't like being mean, so we decided to be Skaven. The idea was that everything we do would be for our own nefarious purposes, but end up helping people, essentially. Like, steal a giant chunk of warpstone that it turns out the beastmen were trying to turn into a herdstone. Raise a village with fire? Turns out we just burnt out the plague that was ravaging the area. So for those of you who have no idea what the hell this story is talking about, beastmen, Skaven are the rat folk of Warhammer Fantasy. They're intuitive, and also absolutely insane. I mean, check out this picture, they have miniguns. Put miniguns in your fantasy, please. With that diversion out of the way, let's get back to the story. So we were having fun, and our group was as follows. We had a storm vermin. He was a fighter. I think Battlemaster. Our barbarian was a mutant. Half-rat ogre. I think he was just using the beast barbarian. We had an artificer. He was a warlock engineer and Jezzael sniper, fighting a single rat portable version of the weapon, a reskinned heavy crossbow for our purposes. Then there was a gutter runner. He was a rogue. And finally me, our face, a grey seer, and warlock. I was a celestial warlock. Cheating, I know, but we needed the healing. Things were going great. We've done a bunch of accidental heroics, convinced we were the most devious motherflockers in the land. Of course, we found out that people were happy about the things we were doing. So, of course, being little ratty rat shits, yes, we tried to get paid. So, naturally, I stroll in, my group on my tail, acting like the baddest batch in town, and we get laughed at. And I know, humans would kill them instantly. They don't believe they exist, blah blah blah. We were having fun. Eat me. But then the DM says it. The noble says, "You must be a fool if you think I'm going to pay some rat and her flocked up little troop." The guards jump out from behind the curtains and make grabs for all of you. Make a dexterity saving throw to see if they catch you or not. But Mr. Gutterrunner, who was the neckest of beards, was not pleased. He says, "What? She?" And our rat ogre,
who is a glorious himbo that I am depressed to say I lost contact with, just says,
"Yeah, I mean, they're talking about Briar's character."
and Neckbeard goes on about, Skaven don't have women, at least the ones that aren't in flock pits. An awkward silence follows, and Stormvermin says, you weren't here for Session 0. She okayed it with the DM. Her Grey Seer has horns. She was deemed too important to be turned into a broodmother. As all of this happens, all of us except the Neckbeard roll and succeed on our saving throws. The Neckbeard is too busy demanding retcons about my character's gender. The Dungeon Master says, I'll ask you once more. Roll your saving throw, please. We're having a game. He does not. So, the DM describes the rats nimbly dodging out of the way, while the gutter runner gets caught by the humans. Neckbeard starts shouting, calling me a tranny, calling me a, oh god, all sorts of terrible things. He even grabs my character sheet before I can stop him, and tears it in half, along with a really nice drawing of my character that the DM's sister had done for me as a coming out present. The DM stood up and told him to get the fuck out of my store. Neckbeard stormed out, knocking Shift off shelves as they went, and we continued on without a rogue. So here's the interesting thing about this interaction. I only ever bought things seldomly from that shop. Most of them were a handful of magic cards and dice sets. Neckbeard spent a couple $100 a week in that store. Models, paints, books, games, all that shift. But that DM didn't hesitate to throw him out because he made me uncomfortable. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, you're a girl. A 1 in a million at a table as far as these people are concerned. But I wasn't even on hormones yet, and they still jumped to my defense. It's a damn shame that place closed down in the pandemic. I was honestly expecting this story to turn out badly. Like the DM or members of the group turning on the player for being oversensitive or some bullshit like that. But they stood up for each other. So good on you, DM. That kind of attitude's gonna get you a lot of good games with good people, and get rid of the ones you don't want in your table. Besides, having female Skaven as playable? That's pretty cool. Okay, maybe they don't have to look like that. Den of the Drake is right. You Rule 34 artists are all over the place. But anyway, on to the next story. This next story by a user Danger Noodle Yorm, I'm gonna go with Yorm, is titled, Everything That Can Go Wrong, Did Go Wrong. The Worst Session 0 Ever. Now, I've talked about Session 0s in the past, but to summarize for any new viewers, essentially a Session 0 is the session before the session, where you, as the GM, and the rest of your players all just talk about what you're going to be expecting to be doing in your upcoming game. It's the best time to talk about expectations, design your characters together, and just hang out like a bunch of nerds. It is also one of the best ways to discover when someone actually wants to be a part of your game, or if they're the kind of person that's going to show up 3 hours late on a Saturday. But in this occasion, things didn't go exactly as planned. So without further ado, let's keep the murder going and dive right into this story. This is the only campaign that I've ever run, which I had to stop before it even started. It began on Roll20. I was running a homebrew game, requested by a regular player of mine. He DMs a lot for his other group, and the campaign he's playing in with me is only at level 4. He's never played above level 6. So he asked me to run a balls-to-the-wall level 20 one-shot. I thought through it and decided that a tournament arc would be a good way to get some insanely powerful characters together. I set it in a giant demi-plane, so they could basically do whatever they wanted to that reality, like a massive soft playground for kids, but with fireballs. Because I needed some mighty enemies and a reason for this particular group to gather, I pitched that they were competing on behalf of the material realm against the champions from other realms. In other words, they had to play races native to the material plane, no Genasi or bird people. I take great offense to that, OP. I also limited Wish to just the listed effects or replicating spells. I want to be clear that I listed all of these rules in the advert for the game. I recruit the players, set up Session 0, and we're good. An hour before we start, Mr. Regular calls and tells me his daughter has broken her leg, so he's out. She's doing well now, just to let you know. It was already a bad omen, but then the other players joined. Our cast. The lawyer hated anything homebrew but joined a homebrew game. The donkey, extremely stubborn, no room for compromise. The weeb, the only redeemable character here, probably including me. The sexist, only join for enough time to find out I'm a woman, and then tells me he doesn't play with girls.
That feeling you get when your best buddy puts his hand on your thigh, and you feel your pecker head scrape against the zipper of your favorite pair of ripped jeans. Your butthole puckers. That's the feeling of driving a Ford truck. Ford. No girls allowed.
The lawyer kicks it off by telling me this isn't how demiplane works. I tell him he's wrong, because this plane was created specifically for the tournament by a god. He grumbles. The weeb wants to play a fallen Aasimar. Oh, of course he does. I was fine with that. There was a good plot hook for conflict with the Celestia team. The lawyer argues that Aasimar shouldn't be allowed, because they're plane-touched. I point out they're born on the material plane, and he wants to play a tiefling, technically also descended from a power from another plane. Lawyer doubles down, and Donkey backs him. So now neither Weeb nor Lawyer get to play what they want. Weeb says he wants to play a ranger. Donkey reveals she's also min-maxed, and is firm in her belief that rangers suck. To be fair, rangers do suck. I make it clear that no one will be punished for playing a weaker class, or for choosing to do something for roleplay reasons instead of combat prowess. That's not the reason why rangers suck though, let's be honest. But they've already ruined his idea for him, and he goes quiet for a few minutes. Donkey decides she wants to play a cleric of a god she's homebrewed herself. I'm not really down with players assuming they can add their own homebrew, but I'm willing to hear her out. She basically describes Lyra, goddess of joy. I suggest she follows her, but no, she wants her special homebrew thing. Lawyer is practically frothing at the mouth. I suggest a compromise, that where Donkey comes from, Lyra is called something different, the homebrew name, and is worshipped a little differently, but she's still the same goddess. Nope, they're not happy with that. Weeb has been quietly doing his own thing, and comes back with a character sheet. It's filled with homebrew magic items. If she's allowed to homebrew, I should be too. I tell him no, and not to take the piss. He goes off and brings me back, basically Naruto. A half-monk, half-warlock, who was rejected by his village, but now rules it. It's finally a character I can work with. I tell him it's good, and he and Donkey start nerding out together. It breaks the tension enough that we can start to get back to making a character sheet for everyone. Lawyer decides to play a wizard.
I'll just wish that we win.
No, you won't. Wish is limited. He goes off again about how unfair that is, and how badly I've nerfed him, as if the basic uses of Wish aren't still very strong. Donkey hands her sheet in, while he's popping off. I think she was hoping that I wouldn't notice the bard spells she'd picked. My goddess lets me cast them. No, she doesn't. How am I meant to make a character if you have all these preconceived notions of the world? And I was done. I kicked Donkey and Lawyer from the Discord server, invited Weeb to fill a spot in one of my regular campaigns, and never looked back. I should have shut it down when they bullied Weeb out of his character, but I was in denial, convinced I could claw it back. And this is precisely why you have a Session 0. And the way this DM used it was perfect. They immediately identified who the problem players were going to be before the game even started. They set down their cards on the table and even attempted to make compromises when there were bumps on the road. I still think they should have probably allowed things like Genasi, but this kind of conversation, it's essential to starting out a game, especially with strangers and especially in something like a high-level game. There's a reason why there aren't a lot of 5e adventures that make it all the way to 20th level. Past level 14, you basically have to homebrew the entire game to make it work at that point. But overall, A+ Session 0, 10 out of 10, would kick the Lawyer again. It's got a little something for everyone. So, that's it for today's stories. But I'd first like to make some special mentions to members of the community so far. A special thank you to Ghost Chef for becoming our first Baron of Beaks over on the Crowe's Perch Patreon. Our first member inducted into the Burb aristocracy. And speaking of the aristocracy, we're bringing back Art of the Week. Art of the Week? And this week's Art of the Week goes to the exceptionally talented Ezian Dani. This is an incredible monster design, and I would be glad to have it spit acid into my eyeballs. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time as the crow flies.